Welcome to the Nancy Chu live stream. Hi, Roshan, welcome.
Oh, thank you.
I'm in California. Tell us where you're based and what time it is over there.
Yeah, I am in Portugal. Actually, moved here 2 years ago, and think it's like 6:15 p.m. at night.
Have
So,
you had dinner yet or after?
afterwards,
Okay, okay.
yeah,
Well, thank you for spending time with us today. And the reason why I really was looking forward to this is because I love storytelling. And in the beginning of my coaching journey, I wanted to spend most of my time helping people with storytelling, but I couldn't pull it off. But you pull it off. And I'm so excited to dive in deeper with you because I took your course and it is amazing. And
uh,
that's why I want to share this insight with everyone. And the reason why I'm so excited about it was because my own career growth was largely due to the impact of storytelling. And I got lucky because
yeah,
someone pointed out to me that I needed to get better at it.
yeah. I believe it. It's such a powerful skill. It's so important.
Yeah, and I didn't think that it was that important. It felt kind of like a nice to have. But then when I saw that basically I saw s- exponential growth
Yeah,
in my own career. And if
yeah,
there's only one skill that I could attribute it to, it would be storytelling. And so the purpose of this live stream today is to help bring more awareness so that everyone has a better sense that it's not a nice to have.
yeah.
It is very, very critical.
That's right.
So
Yeah,
tell us a little bit about yourself.
yeah. So I've been building products for over 25 years. My background's computer science, so I was a software engineer, I think, the first 7 or 8 years, but then past 17 years, I've been working as a product manager. I've worked at startups, mid-sized companies, big enterprise companies like Oracle.
Hey, me too.
Yeah, oh yeah, that's right. Yahoo, Meta, and then most recently, I was at Google, and I led the Google Messages team, which was, I think, a team of 8 PMs, but an org of over 300 people. And it was honestly one of the best experiences. But I've learned a lot in my 25-year journey, so I'm excited to share some of that with the folks on the webinar.
I love that. And right now we have 15 people joining us on LinkedIn. So chime in, leave a comment so that we will see what's top of mind for you. Happy to answer. Okay, I'm gonna speak on Roshan's behalf. If you have any questions, please feel free to put it in the comments below. And I have just one top of mind question for you. You mentioned that you were influencing a couple hundred people in the org. Did I get it right? Did you say 300?
Yeah, so the messages team at Google is about 300 strong in terms of all the cross-functional people on the team.
The reason I want to highlight 300 is because it is different when you're trying to influence 3 people versus 30
Yeah,
people versus 300 people.
absolutely. Yeah,
So one is, yes, we can influence and lead our teams. I think we're pretty comfortable with that. But when it comes to 300 people, that's the skills needed there is to mobilize the entire org.
yeah, no, for sure. I mean, you know, PMs have to, I say, persuade or perish. So just doing your daily job as a PM, you have to persuade, you know, people to move towards a goal.
Yes.
But as you become a leader, you don't have time to meet with everybody one on one. There was no way when I was running the team that I could meet with 300 people. And so I had to rally and move the entire org towards the goal with just the strength of my message. And so storytelling is just fundamental to what we do as PMs. But if you want to grow in your career and become a product leader, it's absolutely critical.
That leads to my first question. What do you mean by storytelling? And you also use the word messaging. Do you use it interchangeably or is it kind of different?
Yeah. So, you know, I think there's a lot of different ideas of what storytelling means. So for me, storytelling is about framing your message, and in particular, framing your message to be clear, compelling, and memorable. Um, if you can learn how to do that, then you can move people, teams, entire orgs to take action. But the common misconception is storytelling is, personal stories or only about the big dramatic, Steve Jobs goes on the stage and, talks about,
Cinematic
yeah,
reveal.
cinematic thing. And those are all formats of stories. So for example, story formats fall on a spectrum. Like on one side, you have reports, and these are like facts and figures. Think about like PRDs or roadmaps. That's one end of the spectrum. On the other end of the spectrum, you have the narratives. These are the dramatic Steve Jobs launches and those sort of big, like you said, cinematic
Yeah.
stories. But actually, in the middle of the spectrum is presentations, and truthfully, this is where most PMs spend their time day to day. And presentations balance the facts and figures on the left with the dramatic storytelling and the narrative on the right.
Mm,
And a good analogy is a documentary. The goal of a documentary isn't just to give facts and figures to the audience.
right.
They can just write a newspaper article. So the goal of a documentary is to add in narrative and use the facts and figures and tell a story and sort of persuade the audience to a certain point of view. And so for PMs, that's design reviews, that's launch reviews, that's convincing people to increase headcount, increase budget. But this is the sweet spot for PMs. But whatever the format, the key skill about storytelling is framing your message to be clear, compelling, and memorable, no matter how you tell your story.
What do you mean by framing?
Yeah. So by framing, uh, let's see, how do I explain that? Framing means understanding how all the pieces fit together.
Mm,
Um, if you just have let's use the example of a picture. If you have a picture, the frame is kind of what brings everything together. It's not that the picture on its own is not interesting, but when you frame it, if you frame it with a really nice frame and hang it in an art gallery, it takes on a certain perception.
yeah.
If you frame it in a different way, it can look like totally different. If you frame it and put it on a bathroom wall, it's going to look very different. So framing is taking the content of your messaging, of your message, of your story, but putting it together in a way to evoke emotions or to build a perception about the story that you're telling.
I didn't learn about the concept and the importance of framing until after I was many years into my Meta career.
Hmm,
Before that, I have never heard of the term.
hmm,
And when it comes to messaging and then telling your story or just positioning your proposal. And
yeah,
then I went to Meta and a few years in, and then all of a sudden it's like, it depends on how you frame it.
yeah,
Like
absolutely.
that's said all the time. It really depends on the framing.
Yeah, I mean, here's an interesting story, and I don't remember all the details, but I remember enough of the story to make the point. But there was a really famous violinist, and had gone to a city and had sold out, like the biggest concert hall, probably like 4 or 5 nights in a row, I think. But actually, as an experiment, he went into the subway and he basically played like a busker. He was just playing on the side of the subway. People walked by, and interestingly enough, most people didn't stop to listen. And it's the same music. He's world renowned, but it was all about the framing. When you're framing it in a way where people can trust what you're saying, you're in this beautiful concert hall. It makes a difference. So the same content,
Yeah.
depending on how you frame it, can resonate or it may not resonate.
I love it. And we also have a comment, a question from one of our community members, Himanshu. He said, I think many of us understand the concept of storytelling. How can we work towards make it a habit along with feedback loop to improve on it?
Yeah. So, you know, um, one of the problems with how PMs tell stories is that they start from scratch every time. Not everyone does this, but when you're asked to present something, a lot of PMs will sit down and open up a deck and just start making slides. And so, what I would say is to make it a habit. More important than a habit is you need a systematic way to do it.
Mm.
Uh, Habit or not, you're going to have to tell stories as a PM. That's what we do. So I'd say it's really more about coming up with a system that's repeatable. And also, once you get your story, there's ways to get feedback as well. But I'd say that's the biggest thing is come up with this system so you can make this repeatable each time you tell a story.
I love that so much, which takes me to the second question for today. And my question is, why do so many PMs struggle with crafting a clear and compelling narrative,
Yeah.
even when they know their products inside and out?
Yeah. I mean, how many of us have, walked out of some meeting or someone else's presentation and said, man, that should have been an email. Or worse, you've heard someone say that after one of your presentations. And the reason is there's a big difference between informing your audience and transforming your audience.
Mm,
If you're just giving facts and figures, just send an email. Uh, if you're giving a presentation like a documentary, you have to transform the audience in some way. And knowing how to transform an audience takes real skill. And here's the problem, and frankly, why I do what I do. Nobody teaches this skill. PMs have to learn it through trial and error. That's how I learned it.
yes.
And the PMs who figure out how to persuade and influence at scale are the ones that ascend to the leadership roles, and the ones that don't ascend. But it's a skill that can be learned. And if I had to list out some of the mistakes I've seen PMs make, I talked about one of them, not having a system and starting from scratch every single time. It's so much harder. I've seen PMs, focus too much on the slide deck, but the slide deck is not your story. It's a visual aid to your story. It's
Right.
not your story. I've seen, and it pains me when I see PMs, presenting to an audience, but the audience is distracted. They're looking at their phone. They're, on their laptops. And the problem is PMs assume that if they speak, then the audience will pay attention, but that's not how it works. You have to earn their attention. You have to
Right.
get them to want to pay attention. I've seen PMs come up with their story, but then rush through the presentation. I mean, how many times have we all been in an executive review and the executive shows up, 20 minutes into a 30-minute meeting?
Yeah.
Or like you start presenting and everything gets derailed by discussions or someone who's asking lots of questions. So PMs don't know how to handle the room and pace everything. I've seen PMs present something, but then nothing happens after. The audience doesn't take action. And the thing is, that the audience won't take action just because you tell them. You have to convince them. You have to make your arguments convincing. And then I'd say like the last thing I see that may not be obvious initially is that PMs, if they don't tell good stories, they don't make a lasting impression. If they have unclear messages, people end up leaving feeling like it wasn't the best use of their time. But over time, if you keep telling these sort of unclear, poor stories, it results in diminished trust in your leadership, and it can affect your growth. Again, like being able to tell persuasive stories is what we do as PMs and what you have to do as a leader. So you want to invest in this skill because you need to build up that reputation, and if not, it's sort of a downward spiral.
I love that. I picked out two phrases that you said that I think are very, very meaningful. So I wanted to dig in deeper. The first thing
Yeah,
you said is informing versus transforming,
yeah,
which is kind of related to what we are just talking about earlier. It's not telling someone what to do because they won't just do it because you said so.
yeah.
What you want is to inspire action. Right?
Yes,
If you can inspire action, then people will take action.
that's right.
And that is the difference between informing and transforming.
A powerful phrase that I use is, the only thing more powerful than an audience who has to take action is an audience who wants to take action.
I love that.
And there's a huge difference there. But if you learn to master that and get people to want to take change, it's going to unlock your career.
I love that. And I'm going to ask you the most exciting question for this live stream, which is, what are you going to teach us today?
Yeah. So, persuasive storytelling is, and I know it's an overused term, but it's one of my superpowers. It was cited in my promotion rationale at Google when I took over the messages team, and I learned it over trial and error over 25 years. But my hope is that I can teach the audience today a framework I use called story maps. It's the same framework I've used, running teams. I've used the same framework to get 9-digit budget increases. Negotiate
9-digit. Hold on one second. Let's not gloss
9-digit,
over it.
yeah,
9-digit budget.
9-digit budget increases. Negotiate partnerships with the Fortune 50 telecom carriers, across the U.S. and the world. But I'm going to teach this to the audience in 20 minutes or less.
All right.
And
Well,
fundamentally change your storytelling.
I just saw that we have a bunch of comments. So let's go over it very
Yeah, let's do
quickly. I love this. I love this audience today. Brandon said, really love this topic and term. And Venetia, hi Venetia, said, do you have any tips on creating clear and compelling narratives? And I think that's what
That's
you're about to
what
teach
I'm
us in story mapping.
That's right.
And
And I
then,
love the enthusiasm.
yeah, me too. Archana said, I'm always starting from scratch. Having a system makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And then Brandon said, per Google, in psychology, framing. Oh, this is when I asked about framing. Framing refers to the way information is presented, where the presentation itself can significantly influence people's decisions and perceptions. I love the Google definition.
Yeah, I love it. And interestingly, you talk about organizational psychology,
Yes.
but organization and the word psychology all points at people. And this is probably the most obvious part of building a story map that we're all guilty of skipping and not doing, but it like focusing on the audience and understanding them is organization psychology. It's all about the people at the end of the day.
Yes.
So we'll cover that when we go through story maps.
All right. Well, let me bring up your deck. Here we go.
All right. Okay, give me a second here. All right. Yeah, so I already mentioned this, but the number one mistake PMs make when they create a story, like how many of us have opened up a deck and said, "Oh, and let me make a skeleton deck," and you just start making slides. But this is a horrible way to do this, and I want to explain why. And I'm going to use Hollywood as an analogy. So, when a director is asked to make a movie, they don't whip out their camera and just start filming scenes. That would be kind of crazy. A beautifully filmed movie with a weak plot is going to be a box office disaster. So before they start filming, they'll write a script. But it turns out there's a step before the script. They don't just immediately put pen to paper. And what movie makers do is they create something that's called a script outline. And a script outline highlights the key characters, the plot points, the sequence of events. It talks about the target audience for the movie, the emotions they should feel, and what they should take away when the movie ends. So they use the script outline to create the script, and the more time they invest in creating that script outline, the more thought they put into it, the better the script. And when the script is done, then yeah, they can film the movie. But it turns out they're not done yet. They may have a great movie, but when you play it in the theater, the lights have to be dim, the sound volume has to be right, the popcorn needs to be fresh. And so there's actually a fourth component to delivering a blockbuster movie, and that's the theater experience. So what does this have to do with product management? So the way you the system I teach on how to create stories from start to finish in a systematic way follows the same four-step process. So you start with the story map, and in the story map, we have to identify our target audience. We have to define how we want to transform them with our message, and we have to list the key points, plot points that lead them to that transformation. Once we have the story map, then we get to create our story. And like a movie script, you have to create your story in a way that engages and grabs and keeps your audience's attention. Once you're done with the story, we can move on and make the deck. But what I'll say is there's actually an art to doing this. So think back to the movie. Imagine they had an awesome script and they go to film the movie and every scene is an extreme close-up or everything is like super dark, poorly lit. It's still going to flop. So you turn your story into the deck, but there's an art to doing it well. And then the final step in our story system is how you deliver it. So how do you control the message? How do you make sure that your message is front and center at all times? How do you deliver your message in a way that sticks? So these 4 steps is the 4-step framework to create stories that persuade, compel, and drive action every single time. And today I'm going to teach you about the story map. It's step 1, but it is the foundation of every single thing that you're going to do afterwards. If you master this one step, I promise you, it's going to completely change how you tell stories.
I have a question.
Yes.
What happens if we skip this step?
Imagine creating a script without really knowing what you're trying to write about or what the point of the movie is. You might get there, but it kind of reminds me of that, a whole bunch, like a monkey banging on a typewriter, and maybe one day we'll come out with Shakespeare. Probably not likely. So if you skip this step, chances are your message is not going to resonate that strongly. And remember, the problem is the more frequently you tell unclear, unfocused stories, the more it's going to impact your reputation and your growth.
Makes sense. And are there different types of story maps for different types of meetings? Or is it kind of like a one size fits all?
Yeah. So it's a one size fits all because it's not about the format of how you're communicating the message. It's about the content of what you're trying to do, what you're trying to accomplish. And so no matter what, whether it's in a meeting, whether it's in a webinar, whether it's, on stage like Steve Jobs, it's about that framing. It's about how do you take the message that you're trying to convey and frame it in a way that the audience is going to find it compelling.
Makes sense.
Okay, cool. So let's jump in. So I'm going to teach you how to make story maps. And we're going to do this by creating one together live. So we're going to pretend that we all work at a company and that we want them to implement No Meeting Fridays. So that's our goal. That's what we want to achieve. And together we're going to answer these 4 questions. Who is our audience? How do we want them to change? Why would they want to change? And how do we convince them? And then after we create our story map, I'm going to show you how to create some really magical moments during your presentation. Sound good?
Perfect.
All right. So let's start with who our audience is. And this is a step that's very frequently skipped, but you have to tailor your pitch to your audience. It can make all the difference. And like a great example of this is, if you're pitching to double your, the engineers on a team, how you'd convince the VP of engineering is totally different from how you'd convince, the head of accounting. VP of engineering cares about productivity. The head of accounting cares about cost. So the biggest mistake people make is they make the same story and they tell it the same story to everyone the exact same way. And it's not going to work. So let's go back to No Meeting Fridays. So we have to tailor our pitch to our audience. So who's our audience? It could be maybe our peers. We want to convince them so that they get on board and they sort of support us in our bid to do No Meeting Fridays. Maybe it's our manager or another leader in the company. The truth is, it could be any of these audiences. So we're just going to pick one for this exercise.
I have a hard one.
Yes,
Stakeholders.
stakeholders. Yes, meaning they could be part of the audience.
Well, it's because they love to meet on Fridays.
Oh yes, they love to meet on Fridays. Yes, yes. I picked this example because I'd love to see someone actually try to turn this into a presentation and make it work. That would be awesome. But okay, so for our story, let's assume we work at a small startup. So we're going straight to the CEO, straight to the top.
Mm.
So now we have to ask ourselves, like, what do we know about her? What does she like? What does she need or want? What keeps her up at night, tossing and turning, ruminating about. So I wrote down some ideas, although I guess we could, with everyone here, ask people for what they think. So we'll do that actually in the next few slides. I'd love to hear the audience weigh in. But I wrote down a couple things here. So, for example, the CEO is busy, pulled in a lot of directions. She thinks long term about longevity for the company. She's interested in sort of the big picture, maybe not so much in the nitty gritty details. She's worried about keeping the employees happy, customers, shareholders. Maybe like team burnout is something that's on her mind. Maybe we know from working with her that's something she worries about. So you analyze your audience, but a couple things here. There's no right or wrong way to do this. In fact, any audience analysis is better than no analysis, just like any user research, customer research is better than none. So a lot of times people will skip this because they don't know how to do it. But it could be as simple as this. We'll talk about it later. I have a course on storytelling and I have a much more systematic approach.
It's in the QR code in the upper left.
There you go. But what I would say is, don't get so hung up on making it complicated. It could be as simple as just trying to understand who they are. And we'll see why this matters in a little bit. Okay, so we know who our audience is. So now the next question is, well, how do we want our perspective to change? Remember, when we present, it's not about just giving the CEO information. It's about creating a transformation. And so how do we define the transformation? It turns out it's actually pretty easy. So before the presentation, the CEO wanted certain things or did things a certain way or thought a certain way or felt a certain way. But now we go in and we present to her. And after, how do we want her to, what do we want her to now want, do, think, or feel? And just defining that is defining the transformation. So I'll give you an example. And there's a tool I use to make it easy. And I love this tool. It's actually quite effective. You could just use this tool and this even alone will change your storytelling. But if everything fell apart, if the CEO forgot literally everything we said except for one thing, what would that one thing be? And whatever that is, that's probably the transformation you see. So for example, we want to present to the CEO, and at the end of it, if we can only accomplish one thing, it would be that she approves no meeting Fridays. Now, one thing that I'll point out is you have to make sure that the gap between where she is and where you want her to be, it has to be reasonable. So it might not be reasonable to, tell our story to the CEO and in one sitting have her completely convinced. So define your transformation, but if it feels like it's too big of a transformation, you can scope it back. So in our case, let's scope it back to, okay, we want to convince her so that at the end of the meeting, she's excited to run a 2-month experiment on no meeting Fridays. Does that make sense to everyone?
Makes sense to me. But leave a comment and let us know if this is resonating or if you have any questions.
That's right. Okay. So we know how we want her to change, but why would she want to change? And that's what leads us to something that I call the key insight. So what is that aha moment? What's that insight that she's going to hear and suddenly she's going to be like, yep, we should totally run an experiment. I'm on board. So what is that key insight? So there's a tool that I use to help me with this, and I call it Super Why. But it's the same as the Amazon 5 Whys, excuse me, where come up with the very first thing that pops in your head, and then like an annoying toddler, just keep asking why, and keep doing that until you start to get to some motivating insight that feels right. So, for example, why would the CEO approve a 2-month experiment? Well, maybe she believes that no meeting Fridays will make her team happy. Okay, it's not so bad, but why does she care about making her team happy? Well, if you remember when we analyzed her audience, we know one of the things that keeps her up at 2 a.m. Is she's really worried about burnout. Okay, so she's worried about burnout, but why is she worried about burnout? Well, we also know, she's wants to keep the shareholders happy, wants to keep the customers happy. She's worried about productivity. So you keep asking why until you start to hit reasons that sound familiar, that resonate with what you know about the audience. And so in this example, by asking why, we can improve our key insight. And our hypothesis is, if we can convince the CEO that no meeting Friday will boost team morale and there'll be no loss to productivity, or maybe even an increase in productivity, we think that she'll leave the meeting saying, yep, let's go ahead and do that 2-month experiment.
I have a question.
Yep.
So when we are trying to derive this key insight, do we just ask ourselves and we make a bunch of hypotheses, or is this something that we should do actual research about?
Yeah. So, the answer is any and all of the above. Most people, when PMs often approach presentations, they know what they want the audience to do, and they feel like communicating, what they should do and the reasons why are enough. But here's the thing about storytelling. It has to make the audience feel something. They have to feel some connection to the story. And frankly, if you want them to care about the story, people care about themselves. So you have to understand your audience so that you can pick the right arguments to make your story compelling. So what I would say is, even if you just on your own take a moment to think about your audience, try to come up with what would be the compelling reason for them, and use the Super Why tool to make it better, even that's a big win. But you can shop it around, and I do talk about this when I talk about delivery, how to shop your presentation around and get feedback and iterate. But I would say, even if on your own you're just doing this step, you're already multiple steps ahead of most people.
I love it.
All these are great questions, and I wish I could tell you about all the things that I've learned about storytelling. It's in the course, but for this webinar,
And the QR code. We have 8 people who already scanned.
Great. But for this one, I'm going to teach you story maps because it's the foundation, and just this alone will transform how you tell stories. Okay, so we know who our audience is. We know how we want them to change, and we know why they would want to change. But now we have to convince them. So the rest of the story map is going to be about getting the CEO to realize that key insight. So the way you do that is you come up with your key supporting arguments. You might already have some of these arguments in mind, and you may have more than 3, but it's about creating focus. So pick your 3 best arguments and put all the other arguments in the appendix. And that appendix, you're going to hear me say it a couple of times, that's very important for when we create magic moments. So before I talk about how to come up with these arguments, if you don't have them already, and I recommend you use my way of coming up with arguments anyways, again, for those magic moments we'll talk about. But before we do that, I want to talk about a 4th hidden argument, but arguably the most important argument. And that is the credibility and trust in the presenter. And so I'll give you an example. If you had 2 engineer leaders on your team, and they both came up and said, look, we need to pause development for 3 weeks and tackle technical debt. Like, we all hate when that happens, but it happens. So exact same pitch, but one of the engineers is someone who has a reputation for estimating things correctly, keeping you in the loop, hitting their deadlines. The other engineer is someone who tends to be overly optimistic about what they can get done. They're not very good at communicating when problems come up. They're often late, and things roll over, week over week or quarter after quarter. So exact same message, exact same pitch, but who would you likely go with? And so you probably would go with the person who has the reputation, the person who has your trust. And so my point of all this is it doesn't matter how focused and clear your story is. It doesn't matter how much your audience connects with it. If they don't trust you, the entire thing falls apart. And we're going to revisit trust because by doing this work of creating the story map, you're going to build this reputation of trust. So that was a little tangent, but let's get back to the story. So how do we come up with these 3 arguments? So I'm going to give you a tool for that. It's called FAQ Brainstorm. And the way it works is you're going to put yourself in the shoes of the audience, and you're going to think of every possible question that you might ask if you were in the audience, if you were if you were the CEO. And it's a brainstorm. So don't edit, just go for quantity, not for quality. And all the questions you generate are going to be useful in the appendix, and I'll explain why in a little bit. So, for example, if I was the CEO, I might ask, okay, well, how do we know No Meeting Fridays is even going to boost morale? And that might lead me to the question of, wait a minute, is morale even a real problem? And that might lead me to the question of, well, how do you even measure morale? And so you can see how when you're brainstorming, go down a line of questioning until you hit the end, and then go back and try to think of it from a different angle. So in the interest of time, I've just put a whole bunch of questions here. Again, just go for quantity, write down everything you could possibly think of. Once you have this list of questions, now I'm going to show you how to create your supporting arguments. So you're going to look for themes. You're going to look for groups of questions that all seem to point to a bigger key question. So for example, these 3 questions, is morale even a problem? How do we know No Meeting Friday will work at our company? How does it impact our international teams? All of these questions seem to kind of point to this bigger key questions, which is morale a serious problem for us? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Another group of questions, won't missing, a day of meetings hurt communication, hurt our customers? All of these point to this bigger key question, which is, well, if we do No Meeting Fridays, won't there be a negative impact? And this group of questions, has anyone else tried it? How do we know this is going to work? All points to this key question, which is, how risky is this? So you would group all of your questions into themes, and you would pick the 3 supporting arguments that you felt were your strongest and that related back to that super why of the CEO. And so here's what the story map looks like. And to come up with the key arguments, you simply answer the key questions. And so here you go. So for example, is morale a serious problem? Well, you know what? Too many meetings shows up consistently, in our feedback internally. Won't there be a negative impact? Well, it turns out that having free time to think is correlated with long-term, better outcomes. How risky is this? Well, we actually have data to show that something like this has been done before, and it has a positive effect. So hopefully that makes sense. Brainstorm all the questions that the target audience could think of. Look for themes. Pick the themes that resonate the most with that super why, and then answer them and come up with your arguments. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Was there a question?
Yes. 1 second. Let me bring it up. LinkedIn user, based on personal experience, using LLMs to poke holes into your proposal helps in identifying potential objections. I love that. And tackling them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in the old days, which is 3 years ago, we didn't have our AI buddies to talk to, but you would shop your story around and try it out on people. I call it the concentric circles of testing. You give your story to maybe like a peer, then you might give it to your manager, then you might give it to a bigger group. And each circle that you're testing with gets bigger and bigger. And every single time you do that, you refine your story. So, let's stick, your AI buddy in there. And absolutely, like, these are all great ways, to think about your story, and great ways to think of questions, frankly, that your target audience might ask.
Love it. I do have to drop in about 3 minutes, so I wanted to give you a heads up on the time.
Okay. 3 minutes.
Yes,
Oh, okay.
top of the hour.
Okay. Then let's go a little faster. Okay. So, they understand the key insight that'll get them to the transformation, and they should believe the key insight because of your key arguments. But why should they believe your key arguments? That's where you back it up with evidence. And so this could be case studies, this could be graphs, data, whatever. Pick one or two pieces of evidence and back up your arguments, and put everything else in the appendix. So everything goes in the appendix, and now I'm going to show you the power of the story map. So, you have the elevator pitch. The executive shows up late. You have maybe 5 minutes to present. Instead of not knowing what to do, if you've done your story map, you can present. So, hey, CEO, I think we should run a 2-month experiment, no meeting Fridays, because it's going to boost morale and we're not going to hurt productivity. The reason is I know morale is a problem at the company. We see it all the time internally. By freeing up that time, it actually results in better outcomes. And we have data that shows that this has been successful before. And see, that's it. That took maybe a minute, but it's crystal clear what we want her to do, why she should do it, and the proof for it.
The underlying vibe is that you make it very clear that you came prepared and you have thought it through.
That's right. So let me get to that, because that's sort of the one after this. So the standard pitch, you have plenty of time. So here's how I want you to change. Here's why you should change. Here's, the first argument on why you should want to change. And here's the evidence to back it up. And what gets interesting is by the second or third argument, you're going to find that they stop asking to see the evidence. And the reason is exactly what you said, Nancy. Your story is clear. Your arguments are clear, and you're backing up your, argument to them with, supporting evidence. So, that trust is going up. That's that little icon next to the trust is going up. But this is what creates the magic moments, especially when you present to executives. So executives are busy. They don't have time to get into the details. But the truth is they operate on trust. If they're satisfied, they can trust your high-level message and recommendation, they'll skip the details. And the way they build trust is they want to be able to poke and prod inside of your presentation. So they might say, okay, I get that argument, but what about this argument? What about another argument you haven't thought of? And the beauty of that appendix and all the work you've done is you could say, oh, that question, yeah, I thought of that question. Oh, you want more arguments? I have more arguments. Oh, you need more evidence for this argument? I have more evidence. And this is a very magical moment. So when the executive discovers you've anticipated their questions, they see how well prepared you are, the trust in you skyrockets. And that trust follows you into all your future presentations, and you build a reputation and a superpower around storytelling that makes you stand out from the crowd. And so I hope you understand how to build story maps and the power of the story map. If you master the story map, you master your entire story.
I love that. Tell us a little bit about what we can get from the full course.
Yeah. So in the full course, I teach you, look, PMs are busy. I haven't met most of you, and I know you are crazy, crazy busy. So I teach you the 4-step system, how to master each step. And I put an embarrassing amount of time to make it as fast and streamlined as possible for you.
It is very fast-paced. I agree.
Yeah. And, that Benjamin Franklin quote, I would have written a shorter letter if I had the time. So I've done as much work as I could possibly do to distill 25 years of learning how to tell compelling stories. And I put it into a 2-hour course. And that's what I offer. It teaches you how to master each of these steps. Even for the story map, I go into much more detail. But even if you don't use my course, my mission is to get more product managers to learn and invest in this skill, because I promise you it'll unlock your career. And if you want to grow into a leader, you have to master this. So do it on your own, or if you want to go faster, you can use my course. But I highly recommend that you invest in this skill. It'll be a game changer for your PM career.
You use a very promising word, which is if you want to go faster.
Yes.
And that's the key. We don't have a lot of time to waste and do trial and error. If you want a shortcut, if you want to learn how to actually do it in a very effective, proven and effective way, highly recommend the Persuasive Storytelling course.
Great.
Great. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. I hope people enjoyed it, and I appreciate you inviting me on here.
Yes, I'll see you soon. Happy
Yeah.
holidays.
Yeah, you too.
Bye.